Welcome, everyone, to the December edition of the Cloud Office Hours, where we're going to be talking about Microsoft Compliance Manager. This should be a little bit of a shorter topic than some of our typical ones, but I think it's a very important one. So I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of the Microsoft Compliance Manager product and how it can help you meet various compliance standards in your organization. So real quick, we're going to go through the Compliance Manager agenda here and talk about it for a little bit, including a short demo, and then we'll open to questions along the way as well, and as well as after the fact. So your You Already Own It team, myself, Jerry Martin, Aaron Ward, George Scott, Mary Tucker, who keeps us all in line, newly added to the Cloud Strategist team that I did not add to the slide, is Scott Dowling. And of course, it's all provided by the guidance of our Vice President, Steve Winter. So don't forget, as a benefit of the You Already Own It service, as You Already Own It customers, you can email the You Already Own It at go-planet.com alias, where one of our cloud strategists will respond to your questions. These are not, hey, my server's broken questions. That's probably not the right avenue for that. But they are, we have concerns or questions around various topics we've talked about in the past or any other topic. We're trying to understand what, should we be looking at Teams over Skype for Business or any of those kinds of strategic questions. We're happy to respond to them. We get back to you within 24 hours with at least we're looking into it if we don't know the answer. Otherwise, we'll have an answer for you within the 24 hours. So Microsoft Compliance Manager. So start off with a couple of framing slides. So when we're looking at how we maintain compliance, there's sort of a process, right? So, we need to read the policies, we need to interpret what they mean, we need to define the controls, we need to implement and maintain them, right? We need to generate some sort of evidence that we're doing so and be able to audit or monitor them, right? And then in many cases, we might even need an external audit as well, right? And certainly from a cloud service provider, Microsoft does. So, varying degrees of, yourself or consulting services to help sort of maintain these things for you, and then elements. So if we think about implementing and maintaining controls, that's on the software to a strong amount. Auditing and monitoring is also on the software or service to a strong amount. But the rest of them are about people. And this tool, Compliance Manager, is about the integration of people with the software. So this whole thing can be a challenge, right? So these are just the obligatory statistics slide in here, but there's 250 plus updates from over 900 regulatory bodies. 65% of firms design and implementation of internal processes as the biggest GDPR hurdle, but it's also the biggest hurdle for any of these compliance technologies. And 40% of firms spend 4 hours a week or more creating or amending reports, right? So this is a big sort of burden to take on as an organization. So this is a shared responsibility, right? So one of the things that I always talk about with customers, and my whole team does when we talk about compliance, right, is what part is on the customer, what part is on the service, right? Because the age-old question that we get oftentimes is, does this make me HIPAA compliant? Does this make me FedRAMP compliant? And the answer is the service itself does things to help you with compliance, but there's a human element of all of them. And so as we look at these things, if we the blue being the actual customer management of the risk, and sort of this pink shade being the cloud provider management of risk. So if we look at this strategy, right, when I'm on-prem, right, everything is your responsibility. As I move to infrastructure as a service, right, things like classifying data and your client protection and all those things, they're still yours. By the way, they're still yours all the way to the end with software as a service. But as we move down the stack or up the stack, depending on which way you look at it, we look at physical security, host infrastructure, network controls. As we move across these other cloud services to platform as a service and software as a service, they become more and more the cloud provider. But if you look, whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service, there are elements of all of these that will always be the customer's responsibility to maintain compliance. Microsoft itself can't make you GDPR or NIST 800-171 compliant all the way down to the desktop. There's an element of that will always be the customer responsibility. And again, that's sort of geared, this product is geared at laying that out for everyone. So, as an example, NIST 800, and so I'm going to throw around a bunch of compliance controls, and depending on what your role is in an organization, you may or may not know all of these, so I'll try to give some sort of context. So the National Institute of Standards Technology, I think I said that right, NIST is one of the main standards bodies that sort of lays out these controls. The NIST 800-53 is the granddaddy of them all, and for the most part, most other compliance standards are somewhat based off of that, right? And so it's a good one to take. So in the example of Office 365, right, a large chunk of the compliance with NIST 800-53 still resides on the customer. Some of the data protection and categorization elements, right? So the access to the production environment itself, who has administration rights and what those standards are, etc. Those are always going to be the customer. Protecting your data, doing the things like encryption at rest, and access to the production environment from a administration and operational side, and personnel control, and some of those things. Those things lie on Microsoft, as an example. So with Compliance Manager, does a couple of things, right? How do we assess the ongoing risk? Let's look at the controls, outline them, and kind of give you an intelligent score as to how you're doing against these controls, right? Give you actionable insights, right? Recommend what you need to do to improve these protection abilities. And one of the things that comes up all the time with customers is, how is this different than Secure Score, right? Secure Score is really general security best practices. Compliance Manager is a list of controls from specific compliance guidelines, and we're going to talk about them in a minute, whether that be 800-53 or FedRAMP or 800-171 or any of these, IRS 1075, any of these that are really important to our customers, mapped back to those specific controls. Are you meeting those standards? The documents say you must do X, Y, and Z. The Compliance Manager tool outlines what those are, whether they're the Microsoft's responsibility or the customer's responsibility, and in a unified console allows that to be documented and exported as a report. And that's really the simplified compliance part. So Compliance Manager is part of a bigger overall strategy. So many of you know that I've been attending these calls for a long time, right? I spent a long time at Microsoft prior to coming to Planet, and I've watched the sort of maturity and evolution of these cloud products around security and compliance, grow exponentially over the years that I've been involved as one of the first public sector cloud guys. And so Compliance Manager is sort of part of, the Office Security and Compliance Center, the Azure Security Center, Windows Defender Security Center, and then as well as, out on the Trust Portal, other documents and guides that are out there. It's all part of the story that helps you get there. So from an ongoing risk perspective, right, let's get a quick, so we all love dashboards, That's why Power BI is taken off, and some of these things, things like key performance indicators and all that. So we all love scores. We all like to look at that. So I can take a quick look against these compliance standards where I fit, right? I can help prioritize the tasks, right? They have relevance on how much they impact or what their risk factor is, um, as well as so I can prioritize my tasks by looking at those risk factors, and I can customize the dashboard to have the things that only I want to see. I can take actionable insights, and we'll show you this when I do my really quick walkthrough. I can understand what Microsoft's responsibilities are and see what the answers are so that I can satisfy auditors. I can assess what those controls are, specifically how they're managed and maintained and how they've been audited. And I can get any recommended actions on my end around those as well. And then on the customer side, we can actually use this tool to assign tasks to various people in my organization to make sure that my organization is holding up their end of the bargain. I can then collect evidence and actually store it in the tool so that when the auditor shows up, we can say, hey, let's go to the tool. I have it all broken down here, including my evidence. So the scope of products, where this is going, some of these are available now, some of these are not, but everything from NIST 871 to FedRAMP 853, all the ISO standards as well that we often hear on. And again, these NIST and ISO standards are oftentimes the foundations for other industry standards that may not have a specific compliance report yet, but may have one coming on the way. So we have the ability, as a guest, I can read information provided by Microsoft. As a reader, I can read data and get information. As a contributor, I'm allowed to edit this data, right? These are the various roles, right? All the way up to the portal admin that can manage the users as to who has access and not. So I can, across my organization, I don't need to grant administrative privileges to people that maybe work in compliance departments, et cetera, where we wouldn't want to grant them any kind of admin privileges, but we would want to allow them to be an assessor or a contributor, et cetera. So really quickly, I'll come back to this. Let's do a quick demo. So I'm going to go ahead, share my desktop. So by navigating out to servicetrust.microsoft.com, I land on this page. So there's a number of things that are up here, right? I can go to the Service Trust portal itself. I can look at the trust documents, oftentimes asked by customers, where do I get the audit reports? Some of those kinds of guides on the security and compliance blueprints, all of those things, they're all sitting here right here in this portal. They're available to all of you today. I can look at additional privacy documentation and some guides around that. Other resources that are out there, well, including a quick link to the Security and Compliance Center and some of those additional information about the Microsoft data centers and frequently asked questions. For us in particular, we're most interested right now in Compliance Manager. So when I click on Compliance Manager, hold on one second. I click on Compliance Manager. It's been a little while since I've been on. I was on earlier today. I go ahead and sign in to provide I have access to this information. I land on the page. So right at the top, they have a nice little tour. I could have actually taken screenshots from this tour from my deck. It does a nice job of sort of explaining things. But if I scroll down a little bit, I start to see the available assessments, right? So there's a few more down here. As I go through them, they're in various stages, right? So the ones that say compliance score are ones that are completely done. Not only has the controls been audited, but they've been validated by third parties, and they've created sort of this compliance score. So ones like GDPR, 800-53, ISO 27001, are completed. If I look down here, also 800-171, and FedRAMP are also completed, right? So these are already done and ready to go and be enabled. The ones that are in progress, why would they even show them? Because the controls are there and the Microsoft responsibilities are there. So if I need to worry about being compliant with those, well, I don't yet have a score, and that's on the way. I actually can at least get this document and framework to do controls. So I'm going to pick one to sort of walk through and take a peek. So we have a lot of government community cloud high customers that we deal with, the GCC high. Many of them have standards around, and while this tool is not yet available for them, I'm going to go ahead and go through the compliance manager for 800-171 as an example. So when I click on it, it takes me to this page and I see a couple things. One, it talks about what the assessment is. It talks about it's 69% assessed because none of the customer managed controls have been assessed or maintained yet. So I look at last modified, etc. So I can go down. When I look at things, I can see here are all the Microsoft controls. These are specific controls. When I click on one, and when I click on one, they map back to the original document, control ID 3.1.1, access enforcement. It's read with an 8, which means it's on a scale of 1 to 10. I don't think I've ever seen a 10. 8's about as highest as we can get. It talks about the importance of this control, right? It talks about the status, which it's implemented, when it was last tested, who it was tested by, in this case, a third-party independent auditor, and whether it passed or not. It also, by the way, when I click this More tab, actually talks about the detail of what the control is, what the test plan was, and are there any other additional notes. So the great news is, and I'll get to this in a minute, I can ultimately export this entire experience out to an Excel spreadsheet so that I can turn this over to an auditor that says, here are my controls, here's the information around them, here was the test plan, etc. So on the Microsoft side, it gives you a great way to look at the audit details, what the controls were, how they were tested and enabled. But here's where the sort of combination of, so that's sort of the technology side. By the way, as I scroll down through these, I don't think there are any that are down here. So here's an example of one that has not actually had failed with low risk on the standard right now. So it talks about, here is the Microsoft implementation details, here was the test plan, and here is in fact Microsoft's response to its failed with low impact, and so that you can sort of explain in more detail to any auditor exactly what the details of it's failed and why it's considered to be a low impact failure. So we can look through and get all that information on the Microsoft side, right? So if I go ahead and go less here, I scroll up and start collapsing some of these Microsoft controls. Here's the really interesting part. So I did all those framing slides at the front end of this presentation to talk about, you have some responsibility within this as well. And Microsoft has taken the time to outline within the document the controls where you have responsibility. And so if I go and look at access control, there are 18 assessed controls. As I look down them, there's an element of that 3.1.1 that is in fact the customer, right? By the way, here are all the compliance standards that actually have similar controls like this. You can see HIPAA's listed, ISO 27001, FedRAMP, etc. So I can look at this and say, okay, what is this all about? I click the More. It says, here's what you need to do. Then for you, you're going to say, this is what we've done, and this is how we've tested it, and I can enter this in for this control. I can also go take any other documentation that I have around this, results of testing, whatever it might be, and actually attach it to this particular control. Set the date that it was implemented and test date. But what I think is even more interesting here is that I can assign it to a resource. So I can go in and attach to my gal, I can say that Bob Ballard is responsible to this. And oh, by the way, this is a low, medium, or high priority, Bob. So the compliance control officer can look at this and say, this is super important. It's high importance. I can add some notes. If I go ahead and hit assign, it'll save some changes. In a couple of seconds here, I will actually get an email in my email account that said, you've been assigned a task in the compliance manager. So it actually already popped on my phone. It'll take a second to pop up on my computer here. But I've actually already gotten the email, according to my phone, that says, hey, you've been assigned a task. While I'm presenting, I might not be getting a notification. So if I go back into my email, maybe it's sitting at the top. Hasn't quite come yet. We'll just wait a second. But needless to say, the email comes. So I can just click on that email. It takes me right to the task that's been assigned to me. I can read any details around what the customer actions are. I can develop an implementation detail and capture it right here in the tool. So that when I'm done and I go through and, I say this particular thing is implemented, it was implemented today, and I can set a test. I can set a test date for it. It was implemented today. I can test it. The test date was today. And it passed. Hold on, it's just taking a second to save my changes here. It passed. If I then go back up and scroll, it'll take a second to update. If I then go back and scroll, the number of assessed controls went up by 1. My score went up as well, right? So I can actually take the human element of my compliance team, look at these standards that I need to make, and then move forward and actually capture all the data, get an overall score, and be able to share this with auditors by clicking the export to Excel. This is just going to take a minute. I can hit open. Yes. It's okay to accept this content. I have all the Microsoft controls and details. And if I go to the customer controls, you can already see it's been implemented. I have an implementation date. I have a test date, test results. And if I had taken the time to type in details there, they would show up as well. So I can then turn that over to compliance. They can store it. They can submit it with any audit, compliance requests, etc. So it takes this whole, everything that's done within the technology accounts for that, allows you to plug in your own results of the human side of your auditing, and I can create a complete report top to bottom on both pieces to say I am compliant with the technology. So that is really, obviously we can go back up just again to highlight. In a nutshell though, that's it, but I could go up and highlight, right, we also have FedRAMP, IRS 1075. So if we look at these, IRS 1075, 4,035 controls. That's a pretty substantial, I mean, for a score of 4,035. But if you look at the total number of controls added together, it's well over 1,000 controls in that standard. So you can see where that could be a substantial amount of effort on your part. So if we click on this one, for instance, and we go down to the customer controls, you can see there are a very large number of those controls, well over 100 that you need to manage. So that in a nutshell is, let me go back to share, manage content, go back to this one, bring my deck back up. That in a nutshell is Microsoft Compliance Manager. And like I said before, a lot of these calls go 40, 45 minutes or longer. This isn't a long one, but I think it's a particularly important one. And I can say that many of our customers, right, don't know that this even exists. And if they do, they haven't taken the time to understand how important it is and generally speaking, how easy it is to use to be able to provide the information for complex audits within your organization. So are there any questions from anybody in the audience? I see a few people typing, but you also can unmute yourself. I'm happy to take questions over the microphone. So while Maria is typing, I'll just go through a couple of wrap-up slides here. I wanted to talk about a new service that we have at Planet really quickly. I jokingly say this is the brought to you by section. Office 365 Advantage Managed Services, the ability to provide admin support, mentoring, reporting, access to the cloud strategist, architecture design, strategic envisioning, security, and additional services. The Also, by the way, one of the things that we're doing for a number of our customers that have a very high dependency on these compliance needs is we're reviewing the results of Compliance Manager and Secure Score, et cetera, as part of this service. And to answer your question, Maria, we are going to post this out on YouTube when we send up our follow-up. Thanks for attending the call. We will, in fact, send the link to that YouTube page to you, so that you can actually then share that link to your coworkers so they can actually watch this session. So yes, we do have other You Already Own It sessions available as well. So maybe as a follow-up, because I know we have new people joining all the time, maybe one of the things we can take for a follow-up, Mary, is for the list of, we can send out a link to the list of all the existing You Already Own It published sessions to the general You Already Own It customer list to just say, hey, in case you missed any of these, maybe it's a great way to sort of follow up as an end of the year touch point with our customers. So I will take an action, but specifically if you post your email address in, Maria, or email me if you don't feel comfortable with that at rballard@go-planet.com. I will happily send one right away for you specifically, but I think that's a great idea to make sure other customers as well are reminded of where they exist. Any other questions from the audience today? I know it was short and sweet, but I think it was particularly valuable. Thanks everybody for attending. I hope everyone has a great holiday, enjoying a happy new year, and I look forward to seeing everyone on the January You Already Own It call. Thanks a lot.